Responders Network, where we're live at IACP in Dallas. I'm Crystal Bailey, your host. We're at the Axon booth with two guests here now. We have retired Chief Renee Hall. She's the retired chief from Dallas, here in Dallas, back in her hometown, or not hometown, you're from Detroit, really.
Yes.
And then we have Saul Glick here, who is a former law enforcement officer in London.
Yes.
And both of them are Harvard fellows who are working tremendously at making change in law enforcement. So I'm going to start with Chief Hall. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're working on, why it's so important to you, specifically on that social impact?
So absolutely, Crystal. First, just let me say I'm excited to be back in Dallas. It is so wonderful to be able to see everyone, see all my officers, former officers, command staff, and so happy to be here. And one of the things that really drove me to focus on social impact was the work that I've done in law enforcement. For so many years, there has been a challenging relationship between law enforcement and the community. And communities everywhere, law enforcement officials, as well as politicians and business people in our country say we need to do something different. And there's been many strides made to do that, but we keep coming up in the same position. So my social impact at Harvard University, when we talked the last time that I was here, is focused around focusing on poverty, because academics everywhere have proven that poverty is the direct correlation to crime. And so if we can address those things, then maybe we can make an impact in law enforcement's office lives as well as our community's lives. So my social impact is around addressing crime and poverty through education, training, and financial literacy. And so we're building wealth in that process at Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative. We are focused on social impact. And so right now I am partnering with Triumph Church in the city of Detroit, where they are opening up a compassion center, and it will focus on all the needs of the community, from health to mental health. And through that center, we'll be able to identify individuals who have the need for education, training, and actually job employment. We know that people need jobs in order for them to be stabilized. And so in that process, Saul and I met. And when Saul and I met, he's very passionate. Some of the same challenges in law enforcement in the United States are some of the same challenges that are for him in London. And so while working on that project to build wealth and create opportunities in the city of Detroit, we came up with the idea of Police for America. So we have two projects that we're working on. I'm working on two projects. One is with him and one is singular. But Harvard University has us really, really busy and focused on saving the world, because it's one of the best elite universities in the world.
Yeah, it is, and you're able to have those resources right there at that institution.
Absolutely. Crystal, we know that if we don't do something different, we're not going to get different results. We say doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome, is the definition of insanity.
Sure is.
And if we are not addressing one of the key issues, we keep doing everything except addressing the key issues of crime in our country. And until we do that, we're going to continue to get the same results. But this way, law enforcement, someone like me who has a history, grew up in Detroit, and understands that challenge, has a direct relationship and also has the opportunity to build relationships with the community and the law enforcement profession in their respective areas. So I'm excited about the social impact. I'm excited about the things that we've created together that's focus more on the law enforcement side, because we have to do both. There's no one person's responsibility. We have a responsibility in law enforcement, but we also have a responsibility to the community.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one area in which you agree, Saul, right? So tell me a little bit about your background as a London police officer and the neighborhood that you policed in.
Sure. So I experienced many of the challenges that Chief Hall was talking about. I'd like to say it's an absolute privilege to be in Dallas with Renee Hall, who's
the
like
Queen
the
of Dallas, right?
Dallas. She's shaking hands and kissing babies. Everyone wants a piece of her. She's just absolutely amazing. She makes time for everyone.
And she's been dragging you around.
Oh my God, the amount of cards that I've been carrying for her is insane. But it's a real privilege to be here in Dallas, and thank you for taking the time to interview us.
Absolutely.
So I was originally a cop in London, and I didn't come from the traditional policing background. I didn't have any family in the police. I had a MA in liberal arts, and I did some teaching before I joined the police. I really wanted to do fulfilling work within the community that I loved, which is in London. And what I experienced is what so many officers experience. I'm a white guy. I was going into an inner city area where I was policing, marginalized communities who really didn't trust the package that I came in. And I felt like my training didn't necessarily equip me for those challenges. And the same is true in America. So I was fortunate enough to win a scholarship to go to Harvard. Called the Kennedy Scholarship, and I'd like to thank everyone who gave me that opportunity. And when I was complaining in one of my lectures with some people from the Center for Law, Brain and Behavior, who are just a fantastic center, who work at the cutting edge of neuroscience and criminal justice reform, they said, hey, well, why don't you put your money where your mouth is and work for us? So that's how I joined Harvard as a fellow. And I met Renee early on. We were talking about these challenges, her view at the top, and my view at very low-level patrol officer.
Right.
And it was so clear that there was a big gap that needed to be collapsed. And when we were talking about that, we invented Police for America, which we're just so thrilled about.
Excited about it.
And everyone we talk to wants to be involved in it. And it's thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, Chief Hall, you clearly have your hands in the community.
Yeah.
You're doing it. You're actually physically doing it. But Police for America is unique because you're talking about recruitment. You're talking about changing the future of policing from the beginning. Can you tell me the process, how it works, what it is, for people who aren't familiar with the Teach For system?
So I'll start by saying that the goal and the mission of Police for America is to radically change the culture of law enforcement in this country. When I started talking, I started speaking about the challenges between the community and police. And one of the things that we continue to hear in our communities is that law enforcement has to change. The way we do things has to change. And so when we talk about Police for America and changing the culture, it starts with recruiting. Recruiting is a key component of law enforcement and addressing the culture. When we look at recruiting, traditional recruiting, and Saul, we've talked about this in detail. Traditional recruiting is from military bases, lateral movements in law enforcement, and second generation, third generation law enforcement professionals, and that's great. I'm a second generation law enforcement professional, but it's not rendering us the kinds of diversity that we need in law enforcement. I need more people to look like me, is what our community is saying.
Right.
It's what public officials are saying. Diversity means creating a police force in America that looks and resembles America. And that's what Police for America is focused on.
Yeah. I mean, and you would say that there are some similarities with London, even though it's a completely different culture and society?
I would say there are lots of similarities. I think policing across the world has had this inflection point since 2020.
Yeah.
We need change, and what does that change look like? And I think, as Chief Hall said, it's about culture. And, changing the culture. We were talking to someone, we spoke at Noble, which was just amazing, a great opportunity.
That's awesome.
And for those who don't know Noble, it's the National Organization of Black Leadership
Law
Enforcement Executives.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Police for America, and someone came up to me, I won't say his name, and he said, changing the culture of an organization is like trying to turn around an aircraft carrier. It's difficult.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And so we hope that change will occur gradually then suddenly. And that happens through education. And it shouldn't be the case that people only at the very top of an organization are given really fundamental training in racism, organizational management, mental health, community awareness, de-escalation. These are the things that really should be taught at the bottom. So we're going to have a very strong focus on that.
And last time we spoke, I didn't know this, but you told me that there are some training, kind of what you're talking about by the FBI, that only happens when you're elevated to a chief's rank. Is that correct?
At the executive level of law enforcement. So when you're a lieutenant, from a lieutenant to the top of the organization to a chief, you're able to go to some of the advanced executive training like FBI Academy, SMIP, PERF, Senior Management Institute. And it is in these institutions that we are exposed to the Holocaust Museum, where we are recognizing and understanding that it was law enforcement and the use of law enforcement that led Jewish individuals to concentration camps. And then we go over to the African American Museum and we look and see how slave patrols were the first real organized policing institutions at that time, and what that means to African American individuals. And we look at the history of law enforcement throughout, with Jim Crow, civil rights, and we have to understand at that point that policing has to be done different, because when we show up, people have a different emotive response about our uniform based on their history. And if we're not in law enforcement aware of the history of law enforcement, then how we show up becomes indifferent to other individuals. And so we believe that if you know the history, if you know the true history, and you shouldn't just learn that at the executive level, you should know that as a recruit or at the academy level, then you have a different attitude and demeanor about how you show up in the community and what that means to the community. And so we're saying that there's some wonderful training that takes place within our police agencies all across this country, but we must do more, and we must focus on the issues that challenge our communities. And first, to the Bible says, and to all things that to get an understanding. So once we understand, we can attack the situation a lot differently.
It sounds like you're making something accessible from the ground level. Saul, you told me a little bit about the curriculum, history being one of those things. Tell me a little about the process. There's a group of people. Let's kind of break it down for people who aren't familiar or don't know what it is. How does it work? How will it pan out?
So we recruit on 3 core values, which is emotional intelligence, community focus, and diversity.
Okay.
So we want to increase the accessibility of the policing family. We want more people in. We have no issue with the traditional recruitment methods, but all around the IACP conference where we're at, everyone's saying the same thing. How do we recruit differently? How do we have a more representative police force? And that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to have everyone's welcome to apply to Police for America, but we're going to be really strongly recruiting out of HBCUs and elite institutions. And we're going to have a summer residential training program. And we've spoken to a lot of former chiefs, a lot of former commissioners, some of the best academics in the world. And people are really keen to build out a pre-academy training program that prepares officers for a whole career in law enforcement.
Yeah. So it happens before they enter the academy.
Yes.
Yes.
And something that you said when we first met was that the values that you want to exist in law enforcement should match the country's values.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, emotional intelligence being one of them. Clearly, it's the trendy thing to do.
It is.
To be self-aware and know who you are, and then know the community. Because emotional intelligence is, I know myself, I know how to manage other people's emotions. So can you talk a little bit about those 3 pillars, the details of what that means to match the country's values?
Sure. So with emotional intelligence, in many kind of police departments, what is the case is mental health is what happens to other people.
Yeah.
If you can't see it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
And for cops, seeing is believing, much of the time. So a better understanding of yourself and having a group of people who can hold you accountable is something which is very important, because unfortunately in many agencies, approaching someone and saying, hey, you don't seem like you're quite okay, or what's going on, or you don't seem like yourself, can lead to some pretty severe consequences for that officer. And we just want to change that entirely. And so we're going to be, our whole cohort are going to hold each other accountable. They're going to be looking out for each other, and they're going to be feeding back into us so we can support them more. Because it's really essential that you have healthy cops.
Right.
So that you can best serve the community that you exist in.
And I think to add on to that, Crystal, when we say our values are the country's values, this country has told us what they've wanted.
Right.
We've heard them over and over again. The conversation about policing institutions and communities is a 100+ year conversation, if not longer.
Yeah.
So when we say that our values are the country's values, it's because we've heard them. And one of the things that our community asks of us all the time is to listen, to hear, and then to respond. And so that's what Police for America is doing. We've heard you. Now we're doing something about it. We're responding to the needs of this country.
Yeah. And what I love about that is last time we spoke, you told me that you left your position as a law enforcement officer so that you could do this. You were like, I got to go to Harvard and do this.
So because what I found in law enforcement is that it is challenging to make the kinds of changes that you want to make. It's challenging.
Yeah.
We know that 2020 created polarization and politicizing of law enforcement. And what law enforcement needs is not political influence or polarization. What it needs is real, true solutions to address the concerns. And this is not just for the community. This is for every officer whose life is at stake. This year alone, we've lost, almost 14 police officers, if not more than, this month alone.
This week
alone. It was like
14 have been shot.
Yes.
I think it was 7 or 8.
So forgive my statistics at this point, but too many. And my point is, law enforcement officers across this country are suffering because we are not making the necessary adjustments in law enforcement and our communities that need to be made. And no officer should have to pay that price because we're busy picking sides and deciding who's right and who's wrong. Everyone is right to themselves, but once challenged, then you see the flaws in the system. How about listening to both sides, creating a solution? And that's what Police for America has done, is understanding both the needs of law enforcement as well as the needs of the community, and marrying those two to create the West Point Academy for law enforcement and recruiting for law enforcement.
And it's so important, especially now when I think there's been struggles with hiring. I think even law enforcement agencies will benefit from having a group of people that are already vetted, already been educated, already know all these things that the chiefs know, right? So can you talk a little bit more about the 8-week process and what it would look like? I know it's still kind of in development, but tell me about how the law enforcement agencies will be able to kind of take their pick, if that makes sense.
So the goal is to pilot. Our pilot, which will consist of partnering with one agency, one police department. Take, for example, Harvard's, based in Cambridge, Boston area. So we would partner with, for example, the Boston Police Department, and we would do the initial recruiting for them. We would, taking these elite universities, going to them, HBCUs, and selecting those individuals. And the goal is that individual who did not initially have an idea to be the police, because I didn't. That was not my goal in life. But look, here I sit. So to select those individuals and give them 8 weeks of the true history of law enforcement, focus on emotional intelligence. And it's not just about de-escalation, but giving people the foundation to understand that it is all right to retreat. Changing the mindset of a warrior in that, it's sometimes okay to back up and allow this issue or event to unfold, and taking our time in our response so that everyone in this scenario has an opportunity to come out safely. I've spent more than two decades in law enforcement, and everything I've been told is you make it home safely by any means necessary. Well, we're saying everyone should make it home safely by any means necessary. So it's that kind of foundation that we're creating. And it's not different from law enforcement. It's equal to what law enforcement is teaching. It's just looking at it from a different lens and ensuring that the safety in this country is about all of us and not just about some of us.
It's really interesting you say that, because I'm reminded of Linda Williams of Noble
Yes.
saying, not warrior, guardian.
Absolutely.
Having the guardian mentality as a law enforcement officer. And you're what you're doing is you're taking people who are younger and essentially molding them into the way law enforcement officers should be from the beginning.
It's and I want to be careful to caution to say what a law enforcement officer should be.
Right.
Because we have some great law enforcement professionals in this country who go out every day and do a fantastic job. But we do know that the training that we currently have been exposed to, and some of the cultural issues or things that we have experienced need to be adjusted so that there is more of a guardian mindset than a warrior.
Yeah.
And so that's the goal. Police for America is to address those challenges that currently are being experienced for law enforcement and the community by creating solutions through education, training, and diversity, because that is the biggest way that we're going to do that.
Can I just add that Chief Hall has experience of doing this.
Yes.
And she has proved that with intentional hiring, you can make changes that no one thought was possible. And how many years did it take you in Dallas?
2 years, well, almost 3 years, to go from 18% Latino Hispanic population inside the agency to 24%. And it was intentional.
That's tremendous.
It's exactly what we're talking about. Intentional recruiting.
And Dallas has a lot of Latinos.
Yeah.
But the question is, and this is why diversity is important, because Saul brings up a very valid point. Unless you can see yourself in that organization, what makes it attractive to you? I'll give you an example. We took a photo right now, a selfie, and when it was developed, you were not in it. When we pass it around, we say, oh, look at me, there I am, I'll take one. Saul will say, hey, I look great, I'm taking one. And you'll look and say, I'm not in it, I don't want one.
Yeah.
So when we look at our organizations, more than 18,000 police agencies across this country, and we recognize the demographics are 88% male. And of that 88% male, 67 are white male. So when we look at those statistics, people of color look and say, how do I fit within this organization? So you're not going to want to be a part of something that you don't see. So by making the organization reflect the community, not just at the recruiting level in the academy or the patrol level, but through the executive ranks as well. It should not just be at the top that we reflect the community, or at the bottom, throughout the entire agency. So when I look and see law enforcement in the city of Dallas reflects 50% Latinos or Hispanics, because that is who we are.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing to have accomplished in such a short period of time. And like you said, she's living it out.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm interesting that you mentioned that it's not attractive. You know, I wouldn't take that photo, but it's also that I wouldn't necessarily trust everyone. You know, it even lends itself to trustworthiness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I see an officer that looks like me, I'm way less likely to be tense, stressed.
Absolutely.
You know, and I imagine that's why you're talking to HBCUs. That's why you're trying to recruit from university level. Talk about how you're making those connections. Are those conversations already happening?
Yeah, those conversations are happening. We're speaking to a few Ivy League institutions about being the backdrop to our residential training program. We're not going to say too much more.
Right.
That's okay.
but that is the backdrop. And we think it's a very attractive prospect for potential grads to come and do an 8-week program with people who have been there, they've done it, people like Chief Hall, but also the highest level academics in the world. In my center, I work with some of the best neuroscientists, sociologists, environmental scientists. You name it. It's there, and it's in Cambridge. We've been speaking to people at Yale while we were at the IACP. The resources exist.
Mm-hmm.
People want this to happen. People want to be involved.
Yeah.
So actually, the problem's going to be it only being 8 weeks, because everyone wants
more.
Everyone wants more. And actually, there's a point about that, which is interesting. I've never heard anyone complain about too much education.
Yeah.
It's not something that exists. So that's just something that's going to build this foundation which people can take with them throughout their careers. But not only that, this isn't some one-off gimmick. Every 6 months, we want reunions, just like IACP.
Yes.
We want people feeding back in. We want officers from one cohort to meet officers from another, officers from different cities to meet each other so they can share information in the way that other organizations do. That's what happens in the Army.
What happens at FBI Academy. FBI Academy class is 272 people from everywhere in the country. And when you leave, you have access to each other through social media, multiple engines, and then every year they come back together so that they can talk about their experiences and what they've learned and how that is manifesting itself within their agencies. But the other piece that's I think more intricate to this piece is that you can pick up the phone at any point in time throughout that year, or go to your computer and ask for some assistance in any particular area. And you're going to have 272 responses to any given situation that you have. That level of support is so important in this stage of growth as a law enforcement professional, because every day there's something different that you encounter. And we don't have all the answers. It's an ever-evolving system. And so to be able to have perspective from 272 different individuals means the world. So think about Police for America, your first cohort. You're in this academy, and now you have 30 different individuals that can pour into you, you can pour into them, and they're providing you information. And ultimately, in 15 years, you have couple hundred individuals across the country being able to provide information, statistics, and just build on the relationships, the emotional intelligence, and saying, I support you. I know some of the challenges that we're facing in law enforcement, but we support one another. We're here for one another. And that's what law enforcement needs, to be able to have those same kind of relationships. And not just when you're an executive, but every day you're in.
It's valuable.
Yeah.
Valuable resources. And it's interesting, we're kind of going a little bit backwards here, but, you mentioned the social impact, and I can't even imagine what class of 2023 will look like, well, how policing will look 10 years after class of 2023, I imagine that you have plans for these people to care about the neighborhoods that they're policing in, similar to what you were saying in London. Like, these issues exist all over the world. They're going to be able to reflect on the things that they learned in the beginning and bring that back, like you mentioned, every reunion, and there's a cycle. And 20 years from now, what's policing going to look like? What's the goal for you? 20 years from now, what's it look like?
Well, I mean,
we've talked about this.
I know, this is probably too lofty or too
I'd say in 15
big of a question.
years, we expect the most senior police officer in this country to be a Police for America graduate. That's our ambition.
Yeah.
And we think it's a realistic one. I think we also plan on not just one person being at the top, because it's not really about that thing you can hang on your mum's wall. It's about the compound numbers, and that's really how you make change. Year in, year out, we're there. I think that, as Chief Hall said, there's no clear answer often. These are adaptive problems, and they need adaptive solutions.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think the fact that it's going to be an iterative process that requires communication. And what I learned policing is what actually, you speak to anyone here, they'll say the same thing. There's no such thing as over-communication in policing.
Or ever, really.
Or, well,
I'm not a police officer, but I agree.
Okay. Speak to my ex. I mean, but anyway, we want to compound those numbers. We want to, real-time change. If you have issues that you don't know how to deal with, it shouldn't be that you wait until a conference like this where you can see an expert.
Right.
You should have a network that you can communicate with in real time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what Police for America is going to do. That's the solution.
It sounds extremely innovative.
We are so excited.
Yeah,
we
and
are so excited.
Right before we went live, Chief, you shared with me, like, this is the difference between going to these conferences and saying, gosh, this is the problem and this needs to be solved. How is it going to happen? And saying, here's the solution. We've got recruiting problems. Here's the solution. We've got diversity problems. Here's the solution. I mean, it's really tremendous, the work you guys are doing, and it's wonderful that it's happening.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Thank you, Crystal.
yeah, I'd love to know what you think, even as we're working on here with Axon, the Moonshot goal, and it really being a communal goal. I think this fits perfectly into what's happening.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, the Moonshot goal is to cut all gun-related deaths by 50% between both the police and the public in 10 years. Chief Hall, can you tell me a little bit about, how they correlate?
How this marries? Well, I am so excited about what Rick and Mike and myself and we have an advisory board around Moonshot, and I think everyone in Axon is so excited about this. And being in law enforcement for more than 2 decades, this is what we're looking for, to see how we can do things better. This is what it's all about, how we utilize technology with our individuals to get more positive results. So the combination or the link to this is that we have the technology that assists in reducing the gun-related incidents or homicides between the police and the community by 50% in 10 years. Well, imagine adding that individual who is now more emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
So these are much more cognitive individuals who are handling this kind of technology. So now we've just gone from 50% to 70% in the reduction. So it's a perfect marriage, and so we're excited. I am 100% committed to Axon. I've always been, even when I was a sitting police chief, committed to the innovation, their community support, support of law enforcement. And this is a testament as to who they are, and I'm excited that Police for America can add to what they're doing. And so we're just excited overall. Moonshot it's ingenious. I saw at IACP when we were first talking about walking on the moon or going to the moon, when it was just a figment of someone's imagination. And I know some people think that some of the innovation within Axon is some of that same, reach for the stars, reach for the moon ideas, but we go to the moon regularly now. So Axon is definitely taking us to the moon. So I'm excited and just looking forward to see what happens.
I love the way you're putting that. It's like all the time we do that. So I also, what comes to mind right now is, and not to say that law enforcement isn't a revered and respected profession, but it sounds like you guys are going to churn out some superheroes. That's really what it sounds like to me.
So what I would say is that the superheroes already exist. We're just giving them stronger capes and stronger uniforms and a stronger mindset in order to do their jobs to the absolute fullest. So that's my perspective. Saul, what would be yours?
No, I agree with Chief Hall. I never disagree with Chief Hall as a general rule.
She sounds like someone you get behind at all times.
I mean, this is a totally unique person.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 decades of experience in law enforcement, Harvard fellow, she's done it all, and that's why Police for America is going to work. What do I think about the superhero element? I think just providing a chief or a commissioner with a cohort of officers who they know from day one they don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
They don't need to put any more resources into. They don't need to do, they don't have the same anxieties. And a lot of chiefs and commissioners at this conference, they have these very ambitious pledges.
Yeah.
You know, I want a more diverse group of officers. I want better training. I want better this. I want better that. But we've also heard about the violence experienced by officers, and you know, if your murder clearance rate isn't right, that's what you've got to focus on if you're a chief. So where do those goals go in times of crisis? Well, I'm afraid they get pushed to the side.
Yeah.
So we're going to leave the policing to the police officers, and we're going to leave the recruitment to Police for America. That's what we're going to do.
That's a great way of putting it. It's really relieving the worry of having to fill the spots too, especially right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, law enforcement is challenged on so many levels, and Saul said it best. When the homicide rate is high, that's what every police chief in this country is judged off of, your homicide rate.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be your major focus, crime. And if you're focused on crime, your resources go to fight crime. Now, who's handling recruiting or the rest of the things that have to happen in an agency? And we want to be the institution that focuses on recruiting and take that off of their plates.
And I mean, we talked a little bit about Moonshot. Part of it is also data collection and being able to have statistics to turn to what's working, what doesn't work. And Police for America wants to also provide that through their recruits, right? Like you want to have existing data.
Yeah, we want to hold our officers accountable at all times. So not only are we going to track their progress in our residential academy, which they're not guaranteed to pass, by the way. I mean, we're going to be pretty strict on them. But when they're out on the streets, we want to know what they're doing. We want to know what their experiences are.
Yes.
We want to know how the chiefs and the commissioners see how our recruits are doing, and so we can constantly feedback. So we can hold them accountable at all times, and also they can hold each other accountable, because that's what the really strong cohort is about.
Yeah.
You know, that's what successful organizations do. They build that sense of camaraderie.
Peer support.
Exactly. So you can communicate. Yeah, that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd love to hear where you guys are now. You know, what's the plan? What's it look like now? What's it going to look like in a year from now?
So one of the things is, because we are in conversations with, and you know,
too soon.
Yeah, it's we don't want to give too
Set
much
an expectation,
too soon.
right?
No. Not about setting high expectations, but we're in conversations, and you know, at that point of solidifying things, and so we don't want to put the cart before the horse, but we will have more to report very, very soon.
Well, honestly, I hope this brings up the hype, because I'm hyped. I'm excited for what's to come.
Yes.
And I trust that you're, the perfect person for the job, both of you.
No, she's the perfect person.
He gives too much credit to this side, but he is a phenomenal individual, both as a law enforcement professional and a fellow. I'm in the Advanced Leadership Initiative, and he's into the law school and the medical school. So,
I've heard. I mean, it was.
So he's focusing on, you know,
a lot.
social impact from every angle.
Yeah.
And so we're excited. Wonderful individual with a plethora of experience and knowledge around law enforcement and community, and I think together we make a really good team.
Good team.
Yeah.
I have to beat the ladies away, but you know.
It's nice really because you guys just offer very different perspectives.
We do.
You know, and I mentioned to Saul, different countries, you know, different backgrounds, different families, but yet you have the same goal, and it kind of reminds us that we're very much more alike than we realize.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm grateful to have had this conversation with you, to be able to share the good news of what you're working on, and I look forward to being a part of documenting what comes, you know, in the future, and you know, getting to sit down with you next time and
next time.
hearing where things are.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Crystal.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Crystal. It was such a pleasure to be here with you again. Yeah.
And so this is it for today, but tomorrow we will be back live from the Axon booth here at IACP in Dallas, and I can't wait to bring you more chiefs and more really great perspectives here. Thank you so much for joining us.